Hi guys, it's Mr. Lawrence again. So this is our last note video for the week. Thank you guys for those of you that are enduring having to watch this. I know they're not the most exciting videos in the world, but I don't have that much technology expertise, so I'm trying to make it as best I can. So yesterday we were talked about abolitionists, and abolitionists were people like William Lloyd Garrison, who wrote the newspapers, and Frederick Douglass, who was a speaker and a writer as well, who were trying to convince the rest of the country to ban slavery. Now, what happens to all the people that are actually in slavery right now? They can't wait for a law to be passed 10 years in the future. They need freedom now. So that is going to eventually lead to something called the Underground Railroad, which is our main topic for today. But before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit going way back to this, the Compromise of 1850. So on Tuesday, we said that there was this deal made in Congress that eventually would allow for some future slave states, but there was a part of it that was very, very much beneficial to the South. And that part that was beneficial to the South was called the Fugitive Slave Act. And this was a component or a part of the Compromise of 1850. This was a new thing. Up until this point, if you were a slave and you got to a northern state, it very much depended on the location you went to. Some places just kind of, shrugged it off. Oh, there's a black person here. Maybe they're a free black. Maybe they're an escaped slave. They might not pay you any mind. Other places, there would be, bounty hunters after you. So it all depended on the place that you went. But now the national government is going to create a law saying that every single northern state has to commit to trying to find and return escaped slaves. Even if the people in their state, even if you're Vermont and you might hate slavery, you have to, if you think that there's an escaped slave, you have to go arrest that person and you have to go bring them back into slavery. And you could see how obviously this is going to tick off a lot of the states in the North. And this is an example of the federal government really, for the first time, flexing their powers. They're going to have troops out. They're going to, send marshals out. And basically all a slave owner had to do was write a piece of paper or an affidavit saying, hey, Joey over here was a slave of mine. He's 18 years old. He looks like this. And that could look like anybody, but, I think he went in this direction. So basically anybody that's, appears like this, they're my slave, go get them. And that could obviously lead to a lot of free blacks being sent back into slavery. People that were not slaves at all, had never been slaves, and being sent to slavery. So this just seems like an insane law to have on the books. And if you were a person that was trying to help an escaped slave, you could go to jail for 6 months. You could be fined $1,000. You could actually, if you're a police officer and you try to capture somebody that's a escaped slave, you get a bonus. You might get a raise. You might get a promotion. So the entire reward system is just screwed up here, and it's all to try to help the slave owners recapture their property, including having these what were called bloodhounds, these guys they would hire to just go up north and look for them. And there's a famous case that is going to take the attention of the country. And that famous case is of this guy here named Anthony Burns. And Anthony Burns is an escaped slave that goes to Boston. And Boston is a huge center of the resistance to slavery. Yet it really doesn't matter because the long arm of the slave powers are going to reach him there. So Anthony Burns is captured in Boston. He is put into jail. The townspeople of Boston have a public meeting. You can see the flyer here. And they go storm the courthouse. And they actually kill one of the guards. And they try to free him. They do not have any luck. with that, and Burns is eventually put on trial. Now, the way these trials worked is you did not get a trial with a jury, and it wasn't really a criminal trial. All it was proving that, this person matched the description on the affidavit, and they're going to be sent back to slavery. There was no chance for him to have an appeal because, according to the law at the time, he was not a citizen. He had no rights. He had no ability to take it anywhere else. And obviously that struck the townspeople of Boston really hard. And the national government even declares martial law in Boston. So that way they can get him from the courthouse to the ship and send him back to slavery in Virginia. So that story kind of has this awful ending. Years later, somebody actually is able to buy his freedom, but just the idea that you've escaped, you've gotten states away, you're in an area where all these people support you, and yet still your slave owner hundreds of miles away is able to recapture you. Now, so what do you do about it? Obviously, people that are supporting of this cause, whether they're free blacks, whether they're whites, whether there's ministers, whether they're writers, whether they are slaves, what do you do about it? So they create something called the Underground Railroad. Now, this is something you might have heard of in elementary school. Oh, the Underground Railroad. And you might have some misconceptions about it. The Underground Railroad is not a railroad, and it's not underground. It is just simply a pathway or a guide that was not visible or not in the public. They were a series of paths, a series of trails, a series of homes, safe houses, that slaves would take to freedom, ultimately towards Canada. So they would go from the south and they would work their way up north, slowly but surely towards Canada. And it would be a long, laborious process. You couldn't walk around during the day. So this is something where you would go maybe 10, 12 miles at nighttime. A lot of times they would go during the winter because it was less likely that people would be out trying to catch them during wintertime. They would go to these houses or churches that would basically be their safe harbor, or these farms, and they would hide, in a closet, or hide under some floorboard, or hide in a secret compartment for a day where nobody would find them. And it all is by word of mouth. There's nothing printed. There's no headquarters. There's no official president. There's no official leader. There's no official map or pamphlet or guide. Because if that happened, then the whole system would be exposed. And you can see that there are many different paths. This is kind of a map that shows some different paths. So let's say you were a slave in Maryland. You could maybe take the path somewhere up towards Philly, and then you would kind of wind your way through New York and then up through upstate New York. Sometimes people would go up through Indiana into Canada that way, or they would go the long way up through Boston and up through Montreal. So there were many destinations here, or many stops, but the ultimate destination was always Canada. Because that was really the only way, because of the Fugitive Slave Act, that you knew you were safe. Anywhere else, you could be in the furthest corner of New Hampshire here, but the Fugitive Slave Act could still get you. So you had to cross over the border to know that you were safe. And the Underground Railroad did not exactly work as well for every type of person, because this was not a situation where whole groups of family, like 10, 12, 20 people could go at once. A lot of times it was just one or two people at a time. That would be obviously less likely to get caught. The women had a much harder time escaping because a lot of the women worked inside the plantation house or worked inside the mansion. So they didn't have the same opportunity to maybe be out in the fields and escape like the men did. For children, it was a lot harder because how are they going to necessarily follow all the rules or keep quiet, especially the real young ones, or be able to walk that distance that entire time? So younger men might have had a slightly higher rate of escaping. Now, who are the people, who are the heroes that are part of this Underground Railroad? Again, it is not just one person. We could go a list after list of people that helped. But one of the most famous in history, and the person that's nicknamed Moses because she helped guide them to the promised land, was Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman had been a slave herself, and she'd been beaten really badly as a slave. She actually had some major head wounds from this. She said she had experienced visions even because of some of the wounds she had. And she's escaped slavery in 1849. And then over the next, 10, 11 years of her life, up until the Civil War, she is willing to risk her own freedom and risk her own recapture to go back time and time again into Southern Maryland to pick up slaves and guide them to freedom. And she guides them every step of the way. So estimates are that she probably guided 70 slaves over 13 missions. And she had a 100% success rate. She was not captured. Nobody in her group was captured. And she wasn't messing around either. There was a famous story of somebody in her group wanted to turn back at one point, and she pointed a gun at them and said, nope, you're not going back because you're going to risk the whole group if you do that. So she was not somebody to mess around with. They, in fact, just made a movie about her. There's this push recently to put her on the $20 bill, although that's kind of stalled in recent years, but hopefully maybe that'll regain some attention with the movie. And people like Frederick Douglass, who were her friend, said that he basically said she was more brave than me. I was in public during the day. I gave speeches out during the day. She was the one who did all this at nighttime. She was the one actually going back into slave territory time and time again to try to help secure people's freedom. And it wasn't just her. So in fact, there were many places even close to us that were part of the Underground Railroad. This man, Thomas Garrett, who was from Upper Darby, he was a Quaker, and he had a house in Wilmington, Delaware. And that was one of the main stops for Harriet Tubman. She knew if she got to his house, she could kind of hold up there for a second and get some of her people secure. And this statue, I think, is really kind of illuminating. It's Garrett and Tubman together, him kind of lighting the way to his house, and Tubman, the brave the woman here, bring all the other souls with her to get towards this safety. William Still is a free black in Philadelphia, and his house in Philadelphia is kind of the main hub on the railroad there. And then you have Levi Coffin. He is a minister out in the Midwest, so he becomes kind of the leader out in the middle part of the state for people trying to escape that way. So there are many, many heroes here that are part of this Underground Railroad. So we see here the North and South on a collision course. We see the North, some places, just openly flaunting this new Fugitive Slave Act, saying we're not going to follow it. And now you have the South saying, if you don't follow us and you don't return our slaves to us, we're going to bolt. We're going to threaten to leave. We're going to threaten to have a civil war. So that's where we're at for the end of this week. Next week, we are going to get to the end of Unit 6, when there's going to be another law and then one more violent explosion that is going to pave the way towards the Civil War. I hope you guys have a good weekend. I hope you are able to be safe with your family. I hope you're not driving them too crazy. Hope you're getting lots of sleep, lots of rest. Someday I hope to see you back at school. Until then, please keep watching the videos. Feel free to comment in the Google Classroom if you need help with any of your assignments. And I'll talk to you later. Thank you.